Margaret Whitmore adjusted her designer blazer and surveyed the first-class cabin with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to getting her way. At 42, she commanded boardrooms and bent rules with equal ease, her platinum blonde hair always perfectly coiffed, her smile sharp enough to cut glass when she wanted something. "Excuse me," she said to the elderly black woman settling into seat 2A. "I believe there's been a mistake." The woman looked up with kind, weathered eyes. "Oh? I have my boarding pass right here, dear." She held up the ticket with a gentle smile. "Seat 2A, just like it says." Margaret's jaw tightened. She'd specifically requested 2A when booking, the best seat for her laptop work during the cross-country flight to her sister's wedding. "I'm sure there's been some confusion. I always sit in 2A. I'm a platinum member." She flashed her elite status card like a badge of authority. The older woman, her name tag read Rose, studied Margaret with curious eyes, not moving. "Well, honey, I paid for this seat fair and square. Been saving up for months to fly first class to see my granddaughter graduate medical school." Her voice carried decades of quiet strength. "First time I've ever flown anywhere but coach." "Look, I'm sure you mean well, but—" Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice to what she thought was a reasonable tone. "Wouldn't you be more comfortable in your usual section? I could speak to the flight attendant about getting you an upgrade voucher for next time." Ready for the complete story? Smash that subscribe button and tell me where you are tuning in from in the comments. Tomorrow brings another mind-blowing story that's just as unbelievable. Trust me, you will want to be here for it. Alright, let's jump into it. The cabin fell silent. Other passengers turned to watch. Rose's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not anger, but something deeper. Disappointment, perhaps. Recognition of an old familiar song. "My usual section?" Rose repeated softly. Before Margaret could respond, a flight attendant approached, a young man with kind eyes and a nameplate reading James. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" Margaret straightened, her voice crisp with authority. "Yes, there seems to be some seating confusion. I specifically booked 2A, and I believe this woman." She gestured vaguely at Rose. "May have been accidentally upgraded or something. If you could just check the manifest." "Ma'am," James interrupted politely but firmly, "I can see both boarding passes from here. Mrs. Rose Washington, seat 2A. Your boarding pass shows 2B, Ms. Whitmore." Margaret's face flushed red. "That's impossible. She snatched her boarding pass from her purse, staring at it in genuine confusion. I could have sworn." "It happens," James said diplomatically. 2B is right here, just across the aisle. Equally good seat." But Margaret wasn't listening. Something about the way Rose had looked at her, not with anger or indignation, but with a kind of weary patience that spoke of a lifetime of such moments, had shaken something loose inside her. The realization of what she'd just done, what she'd assumed, hit her like cold water. Margaret began, but Rose was already speaking. "It's all right, dear," Rose said, her voice still gentle despite everything. "We all make mistakes." The simple grace of it, the fact that this woman was offering her forgiveness before Margaret had even asked for it, should have been a relief. Instead, it made everything worse. Margaret felt exposed, small in a way that had nothing to do with the airplane seat. She moved to 2B without another word, her hands shaking slightly as she stowed her carry-on. The shame burned in her chest like acid. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Margaret's phone rang. Her sister's name flashed on the screen. "Maggie? Oh, thank God you answered. I have terrible news about the wedding." Margaret's heart stopped. "What do you mean terrible news?" "Jenny, the wedding is tomorrow." David called it off. Jenny's voice cracked through the phone. 3 hours ago. He said he can't go through with it. He's in love with someone else, Maggie. Someone he met at his bachelor party in Vegas last weekend. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. Jenny, sweet, trusting Jenny who'd planned every detail of this wedding for 18 months. Jenny who'd insisted their parents fly in from Florida, who'd taken out a second mortgage to pay for the reception at the Ritz-Carlton. Where are you now? Margaret's voice came out strangled. At the venue. I'm supposed to tell 300 guests that there's no wedding. The flowers are already delivered. The cake is. God, Maggie, what am I going to do? Margaret felt the plane lifting off, carrying her toward a disaster she couldn't control. I'll be there in 5 hours. Don't do anything until I get there. We'll figure this out together. The deposits, Maggie. I'll lose everything. $40,000. I don't have that kind of money to just throw away. Margaret closed her eyes, her successful corporate life suddenly feeling meaningless. All her platinum status and business acumen couldn't fix this. We'll handle the money later. Right now I need you to breathe. Can you do that for me? As she hung up, Margaret realized she was crying, ugly, helpless tears that she hadn't shed in years. She'd built her entire identity around being the fixer, the one with solutions, but she was trapped at 30,000 feet while her baby sister's world fell apart. Honey, are you all right? Margaret looked up to find Rose leaning across the aisle, her face full of genuine concern. The kindness in her eyes, after what Margaret had just put her through, was almost unbearable. I'm fine, Margaret lied, wiping her face quickly. Just some work stuff. Rose studied her for a long moment. I raised 5 children and buried a husband, dear. I know the difference between work tears and heart tears. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed of severe weather at our destination. We're being diverted to Denver for an indefinite delay. Margaret's phone immediately rang again, Jenny hysterical. Maggie, they're saying your flight is delayed? I can't do this alone. The wedding coordinator is demanding answers. The caterer wants to know about tomorrow's head count, and Mom won't stop crying. I'll get there, Margaret promised, though she had no idea how. I'll rent a car, I'll drive all night if I have to. After she hung up, Rose spoke quietly. Family emergency? Margaret nodded, not trusting her voice. My granddaughter Zara, the one graduating medical school. She almost didn't make it through her first year. Felt like the whole world was against her, being a young black woman in a field where she didn't see many faces like hers. Rose's voice was thoughtful. Sometimes the people we love need us to show up in ways that cost us something. Margaret looked at this woman, really looked at her for the first time. Rose wore a simple navy dress that had been carefully mended at one elbow. Her purse was worn but clean, her shoes practical and comfortable. Everything about her spoke of a life lived with dignity despite limited means. I humiliated you earlier, Margaret said suddenly. I made assumptions about you, about who deserved to sit where, and I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Rose nodded slowly. Yes, you were. The simple acknowledgement, without defensiveness or comfort, hit Margaret harder than anger would have. I don't know why I did that. I mean, I do know, but I don't understand how I became someone who would think that way. Success can be a funny thing, Rose said. Sometimes it builds walls we don't even know we're putting up. Makes us forget that everyone's fighting battles we can't see. The plane landed in Denver with no indication of when they'd continue to San Francisco. As passengers began making alternate arrangements, Margaret overheard Rose on the phone. Zara, sweetheart, I don't know when I'll make it now. No, don't postpone anything for me. This old grandmother has waited this long to see you get your doctorate. I can wait a little longer. You just focus on your ceremony tomorrow. I love you, baby girl. When Rose hung up, Margaret saw tears in her eyes, the first crack in her composed exterior. You're going to miss her graduation, Margaret said. Rose nodded, looking out the window at the snow beginning to fall. Looks like it. These old bones aren't built for sleeping in airports, and I can't afford to change my ticket or get a hotel room. Margaret stared at her. Here was a woman who'd saved for months to afford one first-class ticket to see her granddaughter achieve something extraordinary, and now she might miss it entirely. Meanwhile, Margaret was panicking about a wedding that was already ruined, armed with multiple credit cards and expense accounts. The contrast was stark and humbling. Where's the graduation? Margaret asked. UC San Francisco. Same place you're trying to get to. Margaret felt something shift inside her chest, not the sharp pain of her sister's crisis, but something warmer and more purposeful. How would you feel about sharing a rental car? Rose studied Margaret with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. You don't even know me, honey. I could be anyone. You could be, Margaret agreed, standing up to retrieve her carry-on. But you're not. You're someone who saved for months to see her granddaughter graduate medical school. You're someone who offered forgiveness before I even apologized. And right now, you're someone who needs to get to San Francisco as much as I do. At the rental counter, Margaret handed over her corporate card without hesitation. Full-size SUV, GPS, all the insurance. Ma'am, the clerk said apologetically, with the weather situation, we're pretty much cleaned out. I've got one car left, a compact sedan. We'll take it. As they loaded their bags, Rose insisted on paying for gas. I may not have credit cards with no limits, but I won't be anyone's charity case. Margaret nodded, recognizing the pride in Rose's voice, not arrogance, but self-respect earned through decades of standing on her own. Fair enough. But I'm driving first shift. I know these mountain roads. They pulled out of Denver into swirling snow, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the weather. Margaret had made this drive dozens of times for business, but never under these conditions, never with stakes this personal. Tell me about Zara, Margaret said, needing distraction from the road and her racing thoughts about Jenny. Rose's face transformed, years falling away as she smiled. That girl. She was reading medical textbooks at 12. Used to patch up every stray animal in the neighborhood. Her mama, my daughter Teresa, she cleaned offices at night to pay for Zara's tutoring. We all sacrificed, but Zara, she worked hardest of all. What's her specialty? Emergency medicine. She wants to work in underserved communities, places where people look like us don't always get the best care. Rose's voice carried fierce pride. She's going to save lives, that girl is. Margaret felt a pang of something she couldn't name, envy maybe, for the clarity of purpose in Rose's family, the way they supported each other's dreams without question. What about your sister? Rose asked gently. The one getting married? Was getting married. Margaret's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Jenny's the opposite of me in every way. Sweet, trusting, sees the best in everyone. She's a kindergarten teacher, makes barely enough to live on but loves those kids like they're her own. I kept telling her David was wrong for her, but she thought I was just being overprotective. Were you? The question hung in the air. Margaret considered lying, then found she couldn't. Probably. I've never liked anyone Jenny dated. I always found something wrong with them. Why do you think that is? Margaret's phone rang, an unknown number. She answered on speaker. Ms. Whitmore? This is Detective Rodriguez with SFPD. Your sister asked me to call you. There's been an incident at the wedding venue. Margaret's blood turned to ice. What kind of incident? Your sister confronted Mr. David Chun at his hotel. Apparently she threw her engagement ring at him, along with what witnesses describe as several heavy objects. Hotel security was called. She's not under arrest, but she's pretty upset. The hotel wants her removed from the premises. Where is she now? Sitting in the lobby, refusing to leave until someone comes to get her. She keeps saying her sister will fix everything. After hanging up, Margaret stared at the snowy road ahead. I can't fix this. I've spent my whole life thinking I could fix everything, and I can't fix this. Rose was quiet for a moment. Maybe fixing isn't what she needs. What do you mean? When my Teresa was going through her divorce, I kept trying to solve everything for her. Find her a better apartment, introduce her to nice men, give her money. You know what she finally told me? Margaret shook her head. She said, Mama, I don't need you to fix my life. I need you to sit with me while it's broken. The simple truth of it hit Margaret like a revelation. All these years, she defined love as solving problems, removing obstacles, clearing paths. But maybe love was something different entirely. They'd been driving for 2 hours when the car began making strange noises. Steam started rising from the hood. Pull over, Rose said calmly. Margaret guided the car to the shoulder of the mountain highway. Snow was falling harder now, and there were no other cars in sight. She popped the hood, though she knew nothing about engines. Radiator hose, Rose observed, peering into the engine compartment. Probably got brittle in the cold and snapped. You know about cars? Rose smiled. Honey, when you're raising 5 kids on a factory worker's salary, you learn to fix whatever breaks. Hand me that emergency kit from the trunk. Margaret watched in amazement as Rose MacGyvered a temporary repair using duct tape and a plastic water bottle. This'll get us maybe 50 miles. We need to find a real mechanic. But the next town was 30 miles away, and it was already getting dark. Margaret's corporate training kicked in. Find a solution, call the right people, throw money at the problem. She pulled out her phone to call roadside assistance. No signal, she said, panic creeping into her voice. Rose looked at the darkening sky and the empty road. Well, I guess we're about to find out what we're really made of. As if summoned by her words, headlights appeared in the distance, a pickup truck moving slowly through the snow. Margaret flagged it down, and an elderly man in a worn cowboy hat rolled down his window. Y'all having trouble? Car broke down, Margaret said. We're trying to get to San Francisco. The man whistled low. In this weather? You ladies picked a hell of a night for a road trip. I can tow you to Jake's garage in Pine Ridge, but I gotta warn you, Jake went home hours ago. Won't open again till morning. Margaret felt tears threatening again. Jenny was falling apart in a hotel lobby, Zara's graduation was tomorrow morning, and they were stranded in a mountain town with a population that probably didn't break triple digits. There's a motel, the man continued. Clean beds, hot coffee. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop fighting the storm and wait for morning. As they followed his taillights through the swirling snow, Margaret realized she was about to spend the night in a roadside motel with a woman she'd insulted 6 hours ago, while everything she thought she could control spiraled further out of reach. But for the first time in years, she wasn't reaching for her phone to solve the problem. Instead, she was listening to Rose hum an old spiritual in the passenger seat, and something about the sound was oddly comforting. Maybe some things weren't meant to be fixed. Maybe some things were meant to change you instead. The Pineview Motel looked like something from a 1950s postcard, neon sign flickering against the snow, individual cabins scattered around a gravel lot. The desk clerk, a woman about Rose's age with silver braids and kind eyes, looked up as they entered the small office. "Well, aren't you two a sight? Caught in the storm, I'm guessing." "Car trouble," Margaret explained, still processing the surreal turn her day had taken. "We need 2 rooms." The clerk's face fell slightly. "Honey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we're down to 1 room. Convention got cancelled in Denver, and everyone's heading through here looking for shelter." Margaret felt her control slipping further. 1 room. 2 beds, the clerk added quickly. "Clean sheets, working heater. Best I can do." Rose spoke up. "We'll take it. Thank you." As they settled into the small but immaculate room, Margaret found herself studying Rose more carefully. The older woman moved with quiet efficiency, hanging up her coat, checking that the heater was working, arranging her few belongings with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned not to need much. "You should call your sister," Rose said gently. Margaret's hands shook as she dialed. Jenny answered on the first ring. "Maggie? Where are you? The police said you were coming." "I'm stuck in Colorado. Car broke down in a snowstorm. I won't make it until tomorrow at the earliest." The silence stretched long enough that Margaret thought the call had dropped. "Jenny." "I threw a champagne bottle at him," Jenny whispered. "Right there in the hotel lobby. It smashed against the wall behind his head. I don't know who that person was, but it wasn't me." Margaret closed her eyes. "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry. That he never meant for it to happen, but he couldn't marry me when he was in love with someone else. And you know what the worst part is? He was right. I could see it in his eyes. He really does love her. More than he ever loved me." The pain in her sister's voice was unbearable. Margaret had spent years protecting Jenny from exactly this kind of heartbreak, and now she was trapped in a mountain motel while her sister faced the worst night of her life alone. "I'm going to fix this," Margaret said automatically. "How?" Jenny's laugh was bitter. "Are you going to make him love me? Are you going to erase the fact that I wasted 3 years on someone who was settling for me?" "Jenny, I don't need you to fix this, Maggie. I need you to tell me I'm going to survive it." The words echoed what Rose had said about her daughter. Margaret looked across the room at Rose, who was pretending not to listen while preparing 2 cups of instant coffee from the motel's courtesy tray. "You're going to survive it," Margaret said, meaning it. "You're stronger than you know." After they hung up, Rose handed Margaret a steaming mug. "Hard night for both your girls. Your granddaughter's graduation is tomorrow morning. If we don't get the car fixed early, then I'll miss it," Rose said simply. "Won't be the first important thing I've missed because of circumstances beyond my control." Her calm acceptance was foreign to Margaret. How can you be so peaceful about it? This is her medical school graduation. You've been planning this for months. Rose settled onto her bed with her coffee. "You want to know something about Zara? When she was 8 years old, she made me a Mother's Day card. Drew a picture of herself in a white coat with a stethoscope. Wrote for Grandma Rose, who taught me that love means showing up, even when it's hard. I still have that card." She paused, looking out the window at the falling snow. "That child has felt my love every day of her life. She knows I would move mountains to be there if I could. Sometimes showing up isn't about your physical presence. Sometimes it's about who you become in the trying. What's the difference between showing up and being present? Have you ever felt someone's love most deeply when they couldn't physically be there?" ***. Margaret sank onto her own bed, feeling the weight of the day settling into her bones. I don't know how to just let things be. I've built my entire life around controlling outcomes. Control is seductive, Rose said. Makes us feel safe. But it's also lonely, isn't it? The observation hit too close to home. Margaret thought about her sterile apartment, her efficient life, her careful distance from anything that might hurt her. How do you do it? How do you stay open to people when they can disappoint you so badly? Rose was quiet for a long time. You want to hear about my husband, James? Margaret nodded. We were married 42 years. Good man, worked construction, never missed a day if he could help it. But he had a weakness, gambling. Nothing huge, mind you, but consistent. $20 here, $50 there. Over the years, it added up. Rose's fingers traced the pattern on the bedspread. I found out he'd been taking money from our granddaughter's college fund. Not a lot, but enough. I was so angry I couldn't see straight. Packed a bag, went to stay with my sister for a week. Figured maybe I was done forgiving. What changed your mind? He showed up at my sister's house every day for a week. Didn't try to make excuses or promises. Just sat on her porch and waited. On the 7th day, I asked him what he was doing, and he said, showing you that some things are worth fighting for, even when you don't deserve them. Rose's eyes glistened. That man never gambled another cent. Not because I threatened him or gave him ultimatums, but because my love had become more valuable to him than the thrill of maybe winning. You took him back. I chose him back, Rose corrected. Every day for 15 more years, until cancer took him. Love isn't a feeling, honey. It's a choice you make over and over, especially when the feeling gets complicated. Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. I think I've been afraid of making that choice. With anyone. What scares you about it? The question hung in the warm air of the small room. Outside, the wind howled around the motel, but inside felt safe somehow, like a cocoon where truth could be spoken without consequence. My father left when I was 12, Margaret said, the words coming out in a rush. Just packed his bags one day and moved across the country with his secretary. Mom fell apart completely. Jenny was only 8. And suddenly I was responsible for everything. Getting her to school, making sure there was food, holding Mom together when she couldn't get out of bed. That's a heavy load for a child. I swore I'd never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. Never depend on someone who might just leave. Margaret's voice cracked. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot how to let people love me at all. Rose reached across the space between their beds and took Margaret's hand. Her skin was soft and warm, marked with age spots and years of work, but her grip was steady. The thing about walls, Rose said gently, is they keep out the bad, but they also keep out the good. Sometimes you have to risk one to get the other. As they settled in for the night, Margaret found herself thinking about the strange turns this day had taken. 12 hours ago, she'd been a different person, someone who saw the world in terms of hierarchies and entitlements, who measured worth by success and status. Now she was sharing a motel room with a woman she'd initially dismissed, learning about love from someone she'd almost denied the dignity of her rightful seat. The irony wasn't lost on her. Sometimes the very people we think we're above are the ones positioned to lift us higher. Have you ever had a stranger teach you something profound about yourself? Sometimes our greatest teachers come in unexpected packages. Margaret fell asleep to the sound of Rose's gentle breathing and the wind against the windows, and for the first time in years, she wasn't planning what came next. She was simply present in the moment, whatever it might bring. Margaret woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Rose's voice drifting through the motel room. The older woman was sitting by the window, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. I know, baby girl. I wanted to be there so bad it makes my chest hurt. But listen to me, you walk across that stage today knowing that your whole family is cheering for you, even if we can't all be there in person." Margaret lay still, pretending to sleep, moved by the tenderness in Rose's voice. "You remember what I always told you about mountains? Sometimes you have to go around them instead of over them, but you still get to the other side. That's right, baby. Grandma Rose loves you to the moon and back." When Rose hung up, Margaret sat up quietly. "How is she?" "Disappointed, but understanding. That child has more grace than her old grandmother deserves." Rose's smile was watery but genuine. "She said she's going to live stream the ceremony so I can watch from wherever I end up." Margaret felt a stab of determination. "We're going to get you there. Honey, the graduation starts at 10. Even if Jake opens early and fixes our car in record time, it's still 8 hours to San Francisco. Then we're not driving." Margaret was already reaching for her phone, her mind spinning through possibilities. "I have connections. Corporate accounts. There has to be a way." She spent the next hour making calls. Charter flights grounded due to weather, commercial airlines booked solid, train service suspended. Every avenue led to a dead end. Her platinum status and corporate influence meant nothing against the forces of nature. Rose watched this display with patient eyes. "Margaret, sweetheart, sometimes the universe has other plans. I don't accept that." Margaret's voice was fierce. "You saved for months for this trip. You deserve to see your granddaughter graduate. There has to be something." "There is," Rose said quietly. "Come here." She patted the bed beside her, and Margaret sat down reluctantly. Rose opened her tablet, an older model but functional, and pulled up a live stream link. "Zara sent me this. The ceremony doesn't start for 2 hours, but they're doing sound checks. Look." On the small screen, Margaret could see graduates in caps and gowns milling around a stage. The image quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to see their excitement, their families gathering in the audience. "It's not the same as being there," Margaret protested. "No, it's not," Rose agreed. "But love isn't about the perfect moment, honey. It's about showing up with whatever you have, wherever you are. Is presence about physical location, or can love transcend distance? How do we show up for people when we can't literally be there?" Asterisk asterisk. A knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret opened it to find the motel clerk from the night before, holding a steaming plate. "Thought you ladies might be hungry. Made extra pancakes this morning." The woman's name tag read Eleanor, and her smile was warm. "Heard about your car troubles. Jake's already at the garage. He opens early when folks are stranded." Margaret started to thank her, but Eleanor continued. "Also wanted to tell you, there's a young man in the office who overheard you talking about San Francisco last night. Says he's driving that way this morning and wouldn't mind the company." Hope flared in Margaret's chest. "Really?" "Name's Marcus, Michael," Eleanor corrected herself quickly. "Nice boy. Army veteran, drives one of those big trucks. Says he can get you there by tonight if you don't mind country music and truck stop coffee." Margaret was already moving toward the door when Rose caught her arm. "Before we get excited, don't you think we should meet this young man? Make sure he's legitimate." In the office, they found a man in his early 30s with kind eyes and calloused hands, wearing a worn military t-shirt. He stood when they entered, extending his hand. "Michael Torres," he said. "Eleanor tells me you ladies need to get to San Francisco? What's the catch?" Margaret asked, her business instincts kicking in. "Why would you offer to drive strangers across 3 states?" Michael's smile was understanding. Fair question. Truth is, I'm driving a load of furniture to my sister's new apartment in Oakland. She's starting over after a rough divorce, and I told her I'd help her move. Could use the company, and honestly, truck drivers look out for each other. Includes helping folks when the road gets rough. Rose studied him with those penetrating eyes. What branch? Army, ma'am. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came home, couldn't find work that felt meaningful, so I started driving. Gives me time to think, helps people when they need it. Something in his manner reminded Margaret of Rose, that same quiet strength, the sense of someone who'd seen hardship and chosen kindness anyway. There's a catch though, Michael continued. I can get you to San Francisco, but not until this evening. Your granddaughter's graduation, you're going to miss it either way. Margaret felt defeat settling over her again, but Rose surprised her by standing up. Then that's settled. We'll watch Zara graduate from your truck cab if we have to. At least we'll be moving in the right direction. As they gathered their belongings, Margaret found herself watching Rose with new eyes. Here was a woman who'd faced disappointment with grace, who'd found ways to love and support from a distance, who'd turned a racist encounter into an opportunity for connection. I owe you an apology, Margaret said as they loaded their bags into Michael's truck. A real one. What I did yesterday, the assumptions I made about you, that was wrong. Not just politically incorrect or socially awkward. Wrong. It came from a place of prejudice I didn't even realize I was carrying. Rose paused in arranging her purse. I appreciate that. Takes courage to name ugly truths about ourselves. How do you do it? How do you stay so gracious when people treat you like that? Oh honey, Rose laughed, but not unkindly. You think yesterday was the first time someone looked at me and saw what they expected instead of who I am? I'm 73 years old and black in America. I learned a long time ago that carrying anger around just weighs you down. But doesn't it hurt? Every time. But here's what I figured out. Hurt that turns into hatred poisons you. Hurt that turns into understanding heals everybody. As they climbed into the truck cab, Michael already tuning the radio to a country station, Margaret realized that her entire worldview was shifting. She'd spent years thinking that success meant controlling everything, that love meant fixing everything, that worth was measured by status and achievement. But Rose had shown her something different. Worth came from how you treated people when they couldn't do anything for you. Love meant showing up with whatever you had, wherever you were. And sometimes the most profound journeys began when your carefully planned route got completely derailed. You know what's funny? Margaret said as they pulled onto the highway, the morning sun breaking through the last of the storm clouds. What's that? Rose asked. 24 hours ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I was going. Now I have no idea about either one, and somehow I feel more like myself than I have in years. Rose reached over and patted her hand. That's called growing, sweetheart. Tends to happen when you stop fighting the current and start swimming with it. Michael glanced at them in the rearview mirror. You ladies ready for some real truck driver wisdom? Hit us, Margaret said, surprising herself. Sometimes the detour is the destination. As the truck rolled west toward an uncertain but somehow hopeful future, Margaret found herself believing it might be true. The truck cab felt like a traveling sanctuary as Michael navigated the interstate through Colorado's mountain passes. The storm had cleared, leaving a landscape so pristine and beautiful it almost hurt to look at. Margaret found herself actually relaxing for the first time in months, lulled by the steady rhythm of the road and the easy conversation between her unlikely companions. Tell me about your sister, Rose said, settling back with her tablet as they approached the Utah border. The one you're rushing to save. Margaret bristled slightly at the phrasing, then caught herself. Jenny's. She's everything I'm not. Patient, trusting, sees the good in everyone. She teaches kindergarten, and those kids worship her. She's the kind of person who stops to help injured birds and cries at commercials. Sounds lovely. You say that like it's a weakness. It is a weakness, Margaret said automatically, then paused. Or maybe I thought it was because I was jealous of it. Michael glanced at them in the rearview mirror. My ex-wife used to say I was too soft. Said real men don't cry at movies or worry about hurting people's feelings. Took me years to realize she was trying to change the best parts of me. What happened? Rose asked gently. She left me for someone who made more money and didn't ask her to talk about her feelings. His laugh was rueful. Best thing that ever happened to me, turned out. Now I'm helping my sister start over from her own version of the same mistake. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. Asterisk hotel manager says I have to leave by noon or they'll charge me for another night. I don't know where to go. Everything feels broken. Asterisk. She's falling apart, Margaret murmured, showing them the message. Rose looked thoughtful. You know what I did when my daughter Teresa was going through her divorce? What? I bought her a journal. Told her to write down one thing every day that reminded her who she was before the man who broke her heart. Just one thing. First few days, she could barely manage I like coffee, or I'm good at braiding hair. But slowly, she started remembering. Did it work? She's a nurse practitioner now. Remarried to a man who thinks she hung the moon. But more importantly, she learned that her worth wasn't tied to someone else's ability to see it. Margaret stared out at the passing landscape. I've spent my whole career telling people what to do, how to fix their problems. But I've never just listened to what they actually need. There's your answer then, Rose said simply. At 9:45 a.m. Mountain Time, they pulled into a truck stop outside Salt Lake City. Rose set up her tablet on the small table in the driver's lounge, and the three of them crowded around the screen as the graduation ceremony began. The live stream quality was better than Margaret had expected. She could see Zara in the third row of graduates, her smile radiant even through the pixelated video. The young woman looked exactly like Rose had described. Confident, purposeful, ready to change the world. There she is, Rose whispered, tears streaming down her face. My baby girl. As the dean began calling names alphabetically, Rose called Zara's phone. To Margaret's surprise, the young woman answered. Grandma Rose. Did you make it? I don't see you in the audience. I'm watching you on the live stream, baby girl. Had some travel troubles, but nothing could keep me from seeing this moment. Through the tablet screen, they could see Zara scanning the audience, phone pressed to her ear. I wish you were here. I am here, Rose said firmly. Look up at that big video screen above the stage. On the live stream, Margaret could see graduates looking up at something off camera. Suddenly, Zara's face broke into the brightest smile she'd ever seen. They're showing the live stream viewers. Zara laughed. Grandma, I can see you. You're on the big screen. Margaret looked at the tablet, confused, until Michael pointed to a small indicator showing their video feed was active. Somehow, the ceremony's tech team was incorporating remote viewers into the celebration. Dr. Zara Washington, the dean's voice crackled through the tablet speakers. Rose stood up in the truck stop lounge, applauding as her granddaughter walked across that distant stage. Other travelers stopped to watch, some of them joining in the applause without even knowing why. There was something infectious about Rose's joy, her fierce pride radiating outward. I love you, Grandma Rose. Zara called out, her voice audible even through the live stream as she held up her diploma. I love you too, Dr. Washington. Rose called back, not caring who heard her. Margaret found herself crying, not from sadness, but from witnessing something pure and beautiful. This wasn't how Rose had planned to see her granddaughter graduate, but the love was just as real, the moment just as meaningful. "That's my grandbaby," Rose said to everyone and no one, her voice thick with emotion. "She's going to save lives." An older trucker at the next table raised his coffee cup. "Here's to Dr. Washington." The whole lounge erupted in a cheer for a young woman they'd never met but whose achievement had somehow become theirs to celebrate. As the ceremony ended, Margaret's phone rang. Jenny's name flashed on the screen. "I can't do this, Maggie." Jenny's voice was hollow, defeated in a way Margaret had never heard. "I've been sitting in this hotel lobby for 12 hours, and I keep thinking about all the ways I failed. All the signs I ignored, all the times I chose to believe his lies because believing them was easier than facing the truth." Margaret opened her mouth to start problem-solving, then caught Rose's eye. The older woman gave her an encouraging nod. "Tell me about the signs," Margaret said instead. "What?" "You said there were signs you ignored. Tell me about them." Jenny was quiet for a moment. "He never introduced me to his family. In 3 years, Maggie. Always had excuses. They lived too far away, they were complicated, the timing wasn't right. And his friends, they were polite to me, but I always felt like they knew something I didn't." "What else?" "He never wanted to talk about the future. Real future, not just wedding plans. Like when I'd mention maybe having kids someday, or where we might want to live in 10 years, he'd get this look, like he was trapped." Margaret felt her sister's pain across the miles, but resisted the urge to offer solutions. "That must have been lonely." "It was." Jenny's voice cracked. "I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that love meant trusting him even when my gut said something was wrong. But now I realize I wasn't protecting our relationship, I was protecting myself from having to face the truth." "Which was?" "That I was trying to love someone into loving me back. And that never works, does it?" Margaret looked at Rose, who was quietly packing up her tablet, still glowing from watching her granddaughter's achievement. "No," Margaret said softly. "It doesn't. Real love can't be earned or negotiated. It's either freely given or it's not love at all." "I don't know how to start over," Jenny whispered. "I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants." "You're the woman who throws champagne bottles when her heart gets broken," Margaret said, surprising herself. "You're the woman who stands up for herself even when it's messy and imperfect. You're the woman who loves kids so much you chose a career that pays nothing but means everything. You really think that's enough?" Margaret looked around the truck stop, at Rose humming softly to herself, at Michael checking road conditions on his phone, at the strangers who cheered for a graduate they'd never meet. All of them just showing up, just being present, just offering what they had. "Jenny," she said, "I think it's everything." They reached the outskirts of San Francisco as the sun was setting, painting the bay in shades of gold and amber that took Margaret's breath away. She'd flown into this city dozens of times for business, but seeing it from the highway, after the journey they'd shared, felt like arriving somewhere entirely new. "Where should we drop you?" Michael asked as they navigated the evening traffic. Margaret realized she hadn't even thought that far ahead. "The Fairmont, I guess. That's where Jenny is." "Fancy," Rose observed mildly. "Wedding was supposed to be there tomorrow. All the guests are still checked in, the reception hall is decorated." Margaret trailed off, imagining the surreal scene awaiting them. Michael pulled into the hotel's circular drive, and Margaret felt her corporate armor trying to reassemble itself. The marble lobby, the uniformed doormen, the careful choreography of wealth and status. This was her world, where she knew the rules and held the power. But something had fundamentally shifted. She looked at Rose, elegant in her simple navy dress, and realized that dignity had nothing to do with thread count or price tags. "Thank you," Margaret said to Michael, pressing several bills into his hand. "For everything." "Just pay it forward," he said with that easy smile. "Road's got room for everyone if we look out for each other." As Rose gathered her modest belongings, Margaret made a decision that surprised her. Would you mind staying tonight? As my guest? I know you probably want to get to your granddaughter, but you're scared to face what's waiting upstairs," Rose finished gently. Margaret nodded, suddenly feeling like a child again. "I'll stay," Rose said. "But only if you promise me something." "What?" "That you'll listen to your sister the way you listened to me today. Really listen, not just wait for your turn to fix things." They found Jenny in the hotel bar, nursing what looked like her first drink, a glass of wine barely touched, sitting at a table covered with wadded tissues. She looked up as they approached, and Margaret's heart broke at the sight of her sister's swollen eyes. "Maggie." Jenny stood unsteadily, and Margaret caught her in a fierce hug. "You came. You actually came." "Of course I came." Margaret held her sister tight, breathing in her familiar scent of vanilla lotion and kindergarten classroom. "I'm here. I'm here." It wasn't until Jenny pulled back that she noticed Rose standing quietly beside them. "Jenny, this is Rose Washington." "Rose, my sister Jenny." Rose extended her hand with that warm smile. "I'm so sorry about your heartbreak, honey. But I have to say, anyone who throws a champagne bottle when they're wronged has some serious backbone." Despite everything, Jenny laughed, a watery, hiccuping sound. "You heard about that? Your sister's been worried sick about you. Drove through a blizzard to get here." "Actually," Margaret said, settling into a chair, "Rose drove through the blizzard. I was just along for the education." As they talked, Margaret found herself watching her sister with new eyes. Jenny wasn't fragile, she was resilient. She wasn't naive, she was hopeful. The qualities Margaret had always seen as weaknesses were actually strengths, just expressed differently than her own. "I keep thinking I should be angrier," Jenny said, staring at her wine glass. "But mostly I just feel relieved? Like I can finally stop pretending everything was perfect." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked, remembering her earlier promise to Rose. Jenny was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what I was most excited about for the wedding?" "What?" "The first dance. I had this fantasy that when David held me in front of all our friends and family, I'd finally feel like I was enough. Like I'd earned the right to be loved." She laughed bitterly. "How pathetic is that?" "It's not pathetic," Rose said firmly. "It's human. We all want to be chosen, to be seen as worthy. The tragedy is when we think someone else's love can give us worth we don't already have." Margaret felt something click into place. "Is that why you never liked any of my boyfriends? Because I was always trying to prove myself to them instead of just being myself." "Exactly," Jenny said, looking surprised. "You're brilliant and successful and intimidating as hell, but around men you liked, you become this version of yourself that felt smaller somehow." The observation hit Margaret like a physical blow. All these years, she'd thought she was protecting Jenny from heartbreak, when really she'd been projecting her own fears onto her sister's relationships. Have you ever realized that what you thought was protecting someone else was actually about your own unhealed wounds? Sometimes our advice says more about us than the person we're trying to help. Asterisk asterisk. "The wedding guests," Margaret said suddenly. "They're all still here, expecting a celebration tomorrow." Jenny's face crumpled. "I can't face them. I can't stand there and explain that I wasn't enough to keep my own fiancé interested. That's not what happened, Rose said sharply. What happened is a man who wasn't ready for real love strung along a woman who was. That's about his character, not your worth. Before Jenny could respond, a commotion at the bar's entrance made them all turn. A group of women in their 60s were approaching their table, led by a silver-haired woman in an expensive suit. Jennifer Marie Harrison, the woman said in a voice that brooked no argument. You get up from that table right now and give your Aunt Patricia a hug. Jenny jumped up, suddenly looking 12 years old. Aunt Pat? What are you doing here? Same thing as the other 150 people upstairs, trying to figure out what to do with a Saturday afternoon and a reception hall full of food. Patricia's eyes were kind despite her stern tone. Your mother's having a nervous breakdown about the deposits, your father's threatening to track down David and have a conversation with him, and your cousins are planning to egg his car. I'm so sorry, Jenny began. I know everyone came so far. Stop right there, Patricia interrupted. Nobody came here for David, sweetheart. We came for you. And we're still here for you, wedding or no wedding. Margaret watched this unfold with growing amazement. She'd been so focused on logistics, cancel deposits, wasted plans, social embarrassment, that she'd missed the most important part. Jenny was surrounded by people who loved her, not because she'd successfully gotten married, but because she was Jenny. What if? Rose spoke up thoughtfully. Instead of a wedding reception, you had an emancipation party? Everyone stared at her. Hear me out, Rose continued. You've got a room full of people, a DJ, good food, and a woman who just discovered her own worth. Sounds like something to celebrate to me. Patricia's eyes lit up. I like this woman. Who are you? Rose Washington. I'm the stranger your niece's sister drove through a blizzard to help, and who ended up helping her instead. Margaret felt tears threatening again. Rose, that's brilliant. Jenny looked terrified. I can't. People will think. People will think you're brave, Margaret interrupted. They'll think you're someone who chose truth over convenience, dignity over pretense. They'll think you're someone worth celebrating. For a moment, Jenny just stared at them all. Then, slowly, her spine straightened. Margaret recognized the look. It was the same one Jenny got when she was protecting her kindergartners from bullies. You really think people would want to stay? For a non-wedding party? Aunt Patricia grinned. Honey, half your cousins are already drunk and arguing about who gets to give the toast now that there's no maid of honor speech. We've been waiting all year for an excuse to party together. Besides, Rose added with a twinkle in her eye, I've got a granddaughter who just became Dr. Zara Washington today. Seems like we've got plenty to celebrate. As the group began making plans, turning heartbreak into hope, disappointment into determination, Margaret realized she was witnessing something profound. This wasn't just about salvaging a ruined weekend. This was about choosing joy in the face of pain, community in the face of rejection, authenticity in the face of shame. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one orchestrating it all. She was just one voice in a chorus of people who loved Jenny enough to help her transform the worst day of her life into something beautiful. There's just one thing, Jenny said, her voice stronger now. I want to make a speech tomorrow. A real one. About what I learned from almost marrying the wrong person. Margaret felt a surge of fierce pride. This was her sister, not the woman who needed protecting, but the woman brave enough to turn pain into wisdom and share it with the world. That, Rose said with satisfaction, sounds like the best wedding toast that never was. The Fairmont's Grand Ballroom had been transformed overnight, not into something different, but into something authentic. Jenny's cousins had rearranged the table cards, replacing Mr. and Mrs. Chun with celebrating Jennifer Harrison, teacher, sister, survivor and friend. The wedding flowers remained, but someone had added handwritten signs, blooming where you're planted, and growth requires breaking open. Margaret stood at the back of the room, watching the most unconventional party she'd ever witnessed unfold. Guests who'd arrived expecting a wedding had embraced this celebration of courage with surprising enthusiasm. Rose sat at the head table where the groomsmen should have been, holding court with Jenny's grandmother and aunts, sharing stories about overcoming life's curveballs. "You clean up nice," Michael said, appearing at Margaret's elbow in a borrowed suit jacket. "Didn't expect to see you again." "Rose invited you?" Margaret asked, though she wasn't surprised. "Said every celebration needs a few strangers to remind us that kindness exists beyond our usual circles." He gestured toward the dance floor, where Rose was teaching Jenny's 6-year-old nephew how to waltz. "That woman's got wisdom." Margaret watched Rose's patient instruction, her genuine delight in the child's clumsy steps. "She taught me something yesterday." "What's that?" "That the people who deserve our love the least often need it the most. Including ourselves." Before Michael could respond, the DJ's voice crackled over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the woman of the hour would like to say a few words." Jenny stepped onto the small stage, looking radiant in a simple blue dress instead of her wedding gown. She donated the dress to a local women's shelter that morning. "Someone else should get to feel beautiful in it," she'd said. The room quieted as Jenny took the microphone, her hands steady now. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I know this isn't the party you expected to attend, but then again, it's not the party I expected to host." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. "Yesterday morning, I thought my life was ending. I thought losing David meant losing everything, my future, my worth, my chance at happiness. I was ready to apologize to all of you for wasting your time and money on a woman who wasn't enough to keep a man." Margaret felt her throat tighten at the raw honesty in her sister's voice. "But something beautiful happened in my darkest moment," Jenny continued. "You stayed. Not for a wedding, not for an obligation, but for me. Just me, in all my messy, heartbroken, champagne bottle-throwing glory." The crowd erupted in supportive cheers and applause. "I learned something profound in the last 24 hours, Jenny said, her voice growing stronger. "Love isn't something you earn by being perfect. It's not something you win by being enough for someone else. Real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that heals, the kind that builds you up instead of asking you to shrink, that love recognizes your worth before you prove it." Margaret found herself crying openly now, not from sadness but from pride. This was Jenny, not the woman who needed protecting, but the woman who'd found her own strength and was generous enough to share it. "So today, instead of celebrating me becoming half of something else, we're celebrating me becoming whole on my own. We're celebrating every woman who's ever wondered if she was enough, every person who's ever had to choose truth over comfort, and every friend and family member who shows up not just for the good times, but especially for the real times." The applause was thunderous now, but Jenny held up her hand. "But I want to share something else. This celebration almost didn't happen because I was ashamed. I thought heartbreak meant failure, that choosing myself over a bad relationship meant I was selfish. I was wrong on both counts, but I only learned that because of some very wise people who entered my life exactly when I needed them." Jenny's eyes found Margaret's across the room. "My sister Maggie drove through a literal blizzard to get here, but somewhere along the way, she picked up a guardian angel named Rose Washington." Rose waved from her seat as the crowd applauded, her face glowing with pleasure. "Rose taught us both something important, that showing up for people doesn't always look the way you expect it to, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not trying to fix their problems, but believing they're strong enough to survive them." Do you think strength is something we're born with, or something we discover when we're forced to use it? Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most painful moments. Asterisk asterisk. Jenny paused, scanning the room full of faces, family, friends, and a few beautiful strangers who become part of her story. So tonight, let's dance badly, eat too much cake, and celebrate the fact that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. Let's celebrate choosing authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, and self-love over settling for less than we deserve. She raised a glass of champagne, not throwing it this time, but toasting with it. To unexpected journeys, to guardian angels who come in all colors and ages, and to the radical act of loving yourself enough to start over when you need to. To all of us, and to the beautiful mess of being human. The room erupted as everyone raised their glasses. Margaret found herself standing, applauding through her tears, watching her sister transformed from a broken bride into a woman celebrating her own resurrection. As the music started and people flooded the dance floor, Rose appeared at Margaret's side. "Your sister found her voice," Rose observed with satisfaction. "She did." Margaret wiped her eyes. "Rose, I need to tell you something." "What's that, honey?" "Yesterday when I saw you in that airline seat, I saw what I expected to see instead of who you actually were. But you saw who I could become even when I was being my worst self. That's a gift I don't know how to repay." Rose studied her with those penetrating eyes. "You want to know how to repay it? How? Pass it on. The next time you encounter someone who's lost their way, remember that everybody's fighting battles you can't see. Choose curiosity over judgment. Choose connection over control." Margaret nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle into her bones like a promise. "There's something else," Rose continued. "Zara called during your sister's speech. She wanted me to tell you something." "What?" "That any woman brave enough to drive through a blizzard for family, humble enough to admit when she's wrong, and generous enough to celebrate someone else's truth, that woman would make an excellent friend to a young doctor who's about to start her residency." Margaret felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of genuine friendship, unmediated by professional networking or social advantage. "She wants to meet me?" "She wants to thank you for taking care of her grandmother. But more than that, I think she recognizes a kindred spirit, someone who's learned that success without connection is just expensive loneliness." As the evening continued, Margaret found herself in conversations that mattered, not about quarterly reports or market analyses, but about dreams and failures and the messy beauty of figuring out how to be human. She danced with Michael to country music, laughed with Jenny's cousins about childhood memories, and listened to Rose's stories about raising 5 children with wisdom and grace. Near midnight, as the party wound down, Jenny found Margaret on the hotel's outdoor terrace overlooking the bay. "Thank you," Jenny said simply, linking their arms together. "For what?" "You're the one who had the courage to turn heartbreak into celebration. For showing up. For bringing Rose into our lives. For finally treating me like someone strong enough to handle my own problems." Margaret leaned against the railing, looking out at the water. "I spent so many years thinking love meant control, that if I could just manage everyone's circumstances perfectly, they'd never have to hurt. But watching you tonight, seeing how you transformed pain into power, I realized I was trying to love people smaller instead of loving them bigger." "What do you mean?" "I mean real love trusts people to be resilient. It shows up without trying to take over. It believes in people's ability to survive their own storms." Jenny smiled. "Rose teach you that?" "Rose taught me a lot of things. But mostly she taught me that sometimes the people we think need our help the most are actually positioned to help us." As they headed back inside, Margaret caught sight of Rose saying goodbye to Michael in the lobby. The older woman moved with purpose toward the elevators, but Margaret called out to her. "Rose, wait." "What is it, honey?" Margaret hesitated, then spoke from the heart. Would you mind if I stayed in touch? I know we come from different worlds, but I feel like I've been looking for a friend like you my whole life without knowing it." Rose's smile could have lit up the entire hotel. "Margaret Whitmore, I was hoping you'd ask. Zara's going to love you, and I suspect you're going to love her too. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose." As they rode up in the elevator together, Margaret realized that in less than 48 hours, her entire life had been reorganized around different priorities. She'd started this journey as a woman who measured worth by achievement and control. She was ending it as someone who understood that the most profound connections often begin with admitting you don't have all the answers. "One more question," Margaret said as they reached their floor. "What's that?" "That first morning, when I challenged your right to sit in your own seat, why were you so kind to me? Most people would have been angry, rightfully so." Rose considered this carefully. "Because I could see you were already angry at yourself, even if you didn't know it yet. People who are truly happy don't try to make others smaller. You were hurting, and hurt people sometimes hurt people. I figured you needed healing more than you needed a lecture." As Margaret settled into sleep that night, she thought about the strange alchemy of the past 2 days, how racism had somehow transformed into friendship, how control had given way to connection, how a ruined wedding had become a celebration of authenticity. Tomorrow, she'd fly back to her corporate life, but she wouldn't be the same person who'd boarded that plane in Boston. She'd be someone who understood that love, real love, wasn't about being needed, but about choosing to be present for whatever came next. And for the first time in years, she was excited to find out what that might be. 6 months later, Margaret stared out the airplane window as the plane descended into Boston, but this time she wasn't thinking about seat assignments or platinum status. Instead, she was reviewing the speech in her laptop, her resignation letter to the board, carefully crafted to explain why she was leaving her VP position to start a nonprofit focused on bridging racial divides through storytelling and shared experiences. The woman in 2B was struggling with her crying baby, looking exhausted and overwhelmed. 6 months ago, Margaret would have put on her noise-canceling headphones and retreated into work. Today, she leaned over with a genuine smile. "First time flying with a little one?" The woman, young, probably military based on her husband's uniform, nodded gratefully. "He's been crying since takeoff. I don't know what to do." "May I?" Margaret gestured toward the baby, and after a moment's hesitation, the woman handed him over. Margaret had never considered herself good with children, but something Rose had taught her kicked in: presence over perfection. She didn't try to stop the crying or offer solutions. She simply held the baby, humming softly, one of Rose's old spirituals that had somehow lodged itself in her memory. Gradually, the infant settled, his cries fading to whimpers, then to silence. "How did you do that?" the woman asked in amazement. "I learned from someone very wise that sometimes people just need to be held while they work through their feelings," Margaret said, carefully returning the now peaceful baby. "Works for adults too." As the plane taxied to the gate, Margaret's phone buzzed with messages. A text from Jenny, now 6 months into a master's program in counseling. "Good luck with the board meeting. Remember, you're not asking for permission to live authentically, you're informing them of your decision." Another from Rose. "Thinking of you today, honey. Change is scary, but staying the same when you've outgrown your old life is scarier. Zara sends her love." And one from Zara herself. "Can't wait for you to visit next month. The clinic is opening next week, and Rose insists on cooking dinner for you. Fair warning, she's been practicing her famous cornbread recipe." Margaret smiled, remembering how naturally she and Zara had connected during her visit to San Francisco 3 months ago. The young doctor was everything Rose had promised: brilliant, compassionate, and possessed of the same quiet strength that had drawn Margaret to her grandmother. They'd spent hours talking about healthcare inequity, systemic racism, and how privileged people could use their resources to create meaningful change instead of just writing checks to ease their conscience. It was Zara who'd suggested Margaret's new venture. Instead of just funding diversity initiatives, she'd said over coffee, what if you created spaces where people could actually encounter each other as humans first? Stories change hearts in ways that statistics never can. Margaret's Uber driver was a young black man about Michael's age, and she found herself asking about his life instead of immediately burying herself in her phone. His name was James, like Rose's late husband, and he was working his way through nursing school. "Good for you," Margaret said genuinely. "The world needs more people like you in healthcare." "Thank you, ma'am. Don't hear that much. Most folks just want to get where they're going without talking to the driver." "I used to be one of those people," Margaret admitted. "Took me a while to learn that everyone has a story worth hearing." At her office building, Margaret paused in the lobby, looking up at the gleaming corporate tower where she'd built her career. Everything looked the same, but she felt like she was viewing it through new eyes, seeing the hierarchy, the subtle ways power was displayed and maintained, the careful distance people kept from each other's real lives. Her assistant, Patricia, looked up as she entered the executive floor. "Margaret, how was San Francisco?" "Transformative," Margaret said, meaning it. "Is the board ready for me?" "They're all in the conference room." "Are you sure about this? I mean, your position here, your salary, your reputation." Margaret placed a gentle hand on Patricia's shoulder. "Pat, can I ask you something? If you could do anything with your life, knowing you couldn't fail, what would it be?" Patricia looked startled by the question. I always wanted to write children's books. But that's not practical. I mean the chances of success. What if success wasn't about money or recognition? What if it was about using your gifts to make the world a little better?" "You really think I could?" "I think the world needs the stories only you can tell." Margaret smiled. "And I think you're braver than you know. We all are." The boardroom fell silent as Margaret entered. 12 faces, 11 white, 1 Asian, all male except for 2 women, looked up expectantly. These were people she'd worked with for 8 years, people whose approval she'd once craved. "Margaret," the chairman said warmly. "Excellent work on the Henderson account. Ready to discuss your promotion to senior VP." Margaret took her seat at the polished table, looking around at faces that suddenly seemed like strangers. Not because they'd changed, but because she had. "Actually, Richard, I'm here to discuss something else entirely." She opened her laptop and began reading her letter, not defensively or apologetically, but with the quiet confidence Rose had modeled for her. She explained her decision to leave, her plans for the nonprofit, her desire to use her skills and connections for something beyond profit margins. "You're making a mistake," one board member said when she finished. "This bleeding heart phase will pass. Take a sabbatical if you need to, but don't throw away everything you've built here." Margaret felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the old need to justify herself, to prove her worth, to maintain their approval. But then she remembered Rose's voice. Sometimes the people who deserve our love the least need it the most. Including ourselves. "I appreciate your concern," she said calmly. "But I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing to build something new with the foundation of everything I've learned here." "What about loyalty to the company?" another voice challenged. "What about loyalty to my own integrity?" Margaret countered gently. "I've spent 8 years optimizing profit extraction. I'd like to spend the next 8 years optimizing human connection." The chairman leaned forward. This is about that incident on the plane, isn't it? The diversity training incident. Margaret felt a moment of confusion before realizing what he meant. Somehow, her encounter with Rose had been reduced to corporate speak, a diversity training incident that needed to be managed. Richard, she said, standing up with dignity, this is about remembering that the people around us are human beings with stories and struggles and dreams that matter just as much as quarterly earnings. If that sounds radical to you, then I'm definitely making the right choice. As she gathered her belongings, the chairman made one last attempt. Think about what you're giving up, Margaret. Status, security, influence. I'm not giving those up, Margaret said, pausing at the door. I'm redirecting them towards something that will matter long after the next earnings report is forgotten. That afternoon, Margaret found herself in an unexpected place, the community center in Roxbury, where Rose had mentioned volunteering before her granddaughter's graduation. She'd driven here on impulse, wanting to see the kind of work she might do, the people she might serve. The director, a woman named Carol, gave her a tour that opened Margaret's eyes to a world that had existed parallel to her corporate life. Kids who needed tutoring, elderly residents who needed someone to listen to their stories, families struggling with basic needs while Margaret had worried about expense account limits. We could use someone with your business experience, Carol said as they finished the tour. But I have to ask, what's your motivation? We get a lot of well-meaning volunteers who want to help the less fortunate for a few months before moving on to the next cause. Margaret thought carefully before answering. 6 months ago, I would have said I wanted to help people who were disadvantaged. Today, I'd say I want to learn from people whose experiences have taught them things I need to know. I think I'm the one who needs helping. Carol's smile was warm and knowing. Now that's an answer I can work with. That evening, Margaret sat in her sterile apartment, surrounded by the trappings of her old life, expensive furniture, corporate awards, a wine collection she'd never had time to enjoy. But instead of feeling empty, she felt excited about the possibilities ahead. She called Jenny first. I did it, she said when her sister answered. I quit. Oh my God, Maggie. How do you feel? Terrified. Exhilarated. Free. Margaret laughed. Like I'm about to find out who I actually am when I'm not trying to be who I think I should be. I'm so proud of you, Jenny said, her voice warm with genuine admiration. You know what this means, right? What? We're both starting over at the same time. Maybe we can figure out this whole authentic living thing together. Next, Margaret called Rose. Well. Rose's voice was expectant. I'm unemployed, Margaret announced cheerfully. Congratulations, honey. How does it feel to bet on yourself? Like jumping off a cliff and hoping I remember how to fly. Rose's laugh was rich and warm. Flying's overrated anyway. Sometimes the most beautiful journeys happen when you learn to walk on new ground. As Margaret settled into bed that night, she thought about the strange circularity of the past 6 months. She'd started this journey as someone who believed worth came from external validation, that love meant control, that security required maintaining careful distance from anyone who might challenge her worldview. She was ending it as someone who understood that real worth was inherent, that love meant presence, and that security came from knowing she could survive her own transformation. Her phone buzzed with one final message, from Michael, the truck driver who'd become an unexpected friend. Heard through the Rose network that you took the leap. Proud of you for choosing the detour. Remember, sometimes the destination finds you. Margaret smiled, thinking about all the detours that had led her here. A missed flight, a broken-down car, a woman whose grace had taught her everything about love she'd never learned in 42 years of trying to earn it. Tomorrow, she'd start building something new. She'd create spaces where stories could be shared across racial lines, where understanding could grow from genuine encounter, where people like her old self could meet people like Rose and discover their shared humanity. But tonight, she was simply grateful for unexpected teachers, for second chances, for the radical possibility that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be. As she drifted off to sleep, Margaret whispered a prayer of thanks for the woman who'd shown her that sometimes the people we think we're above are actually positioned to lift us higher than we ever imagined possible. Love at last hadn't looked the way she'd expected. It had looked like choosing growth over comfort, connection over control, and authenticity over approval. And it had been worth every terrifying, beautiful moment of the journey.